Welcome to Cooper King Distillery. We are Chris and Abbie, the two founders, and we are a self-built distillery just outside of York, and we produce sustainable spirits underpinned by craftsmanship, honesty and adventure.
The format of your tasting experience today is going to be the spirits from your selection box number 1. So to begin with, we're going to have the dry gin, then we'll move on to the herb gin, and then followed by the berry and basil gin liqueur. So make sure that you have got your glasses, your ice and your mixers at the ready, and maybe some music in the background if you want.
And any questions at all, just drop us an email to info@cooperkingdistillery.co.uk and we'll get back to you. The whole idea for this distillery was actually born out of an adventure to Australia about 7 years ago. At the time, Abbie and I were actually in our late 20s living in Leeds. I was an architect, Abbie was a scientist with a PhD, both feeling pretty worn out from studying and working for so long and not particularly happy where our careers were heading. So we basically decided to disrupt things, quit our jobs and bought one-way tickets to Australia, which I can thoroughly recommend. Caused quite a lot of distress for our parents, but they've since recovered. So we flew to Australia, soon found ourselves in Tasmania, which is a tiny little island south of Melbourne, pretty remote. And soon after arriving there, a whiskey distillery produced the world's best single malt whiskey. So they won this fantastic award, first time it had ever been won outside of Scotland or Japan. So it's quite disrupted the industry quite a bit. Now, Abbie and I at the time were backpacking, living in an estate car, fruit picking, and feeling quite opportunistic. So we messaged back friends back home with a whiskey blog and said, look, we're here 20 minutes from this distillery. If you pay our lunch, we'll go and visit and get some blog content for you. So to cut a long story short, we ended up visiting all 8 distilleries on the island and absolutely fell in love with distillation, and specifically the Tasmanian approach, which was sort of a real dedication to using the best ingredients, best raw ingredients, and just genuine craft way of producing, for the most part on a really small scale. A lot of them had no experience in distilling, but producing whiskey and spirits that have been recognised globally. And for Abs, yeah, really inspiring. And we thought, you know what, this is something we could do back home in England. So we ended up spending 2 years away. We worked at breweries, distilleries. There was a chap called Bill Lark who actually was responsible for producing the world's best whiskey cask. He ended up teaching us. We returned to England with a business plan and an Aussie twang and a tan, and off we went.
So after 2 years of training ourselves whilst travelling at the same time, we returned back to York, which is my hometown, and we set about building the distillery. We needed to crowdfund it, so we opened the Founders Club, which is still open at the moment, and then we self-built it. So with the help of family, friends and some founders, we built the distillery over the course of a year, and that got us into producing the gin. So the gin has been an absolute whirlwind of an adventure as well. We've now won multiple taste awards, and we've also got single malt Yorkshire whiskey maturing in cask at the moment.
And our first casks currently are about 1 year old, so another few years we'll have some whiskey ready for you.
Okay, so if you pick up your dry gin, we're going to taste this one first. So pour yourself just a little sample of that.
Lovely.
And then first up, we're going to nose this gin. And I want you to just inhale, see what kind of flavours you're getting straight away. So it's different for everybody, there's no right or wrong way, but what you're probably going to be getting is that first initial hit of cardamom, lemongrass. You get that nice play between the juniper and the lemongrass. You might be getting a little bit of lavender as well.
I definitely get a bit of lavender and the cardamom coming through for me.
Yeah, cardamon's pretty strong there. So go ahead and take a sip. Now I just want you to take a really small sip. We're going to try this neat, and we're going to try this neat because that helps you determine how much tonic you want to add to this gin. Okay, so that first sip you probably want to disregard because you're just going to get loads of alcohol. Now take a second sip and then you'll start to get some of that flavour really coming through on the palate. You get a nice warming spice coming through. And this is our floral and spicy gin. This is how we describe the dry.
Yeah, it's absolutely delicious. Really does open up a lot more in the second sip.
Do you want to talk about the tonic?
Yeah, so we've got a plain Fever-Tree tonic, which is the Indian tonic. What I would recommend is starting off 2 to 1, so that's 2 parts tonic to 1 part gin, and this will just lower the alcoholic strength and open up the spirit, and let a lot of more of the cardamom, lavender, lemongrass notes come through on the nose.
So we recommend starting with 2 to 1, but if you think that's too strong or it needs a little bit more tonic, then feel free to just dilute it to your taste.
So if you're at home now having the tasting, what I would recommend is put some ice cubes in there, get your tonic in there. Garnish-wise, rosemary is absolutely fantastic, or any other herbs. If you've not got herbs, a slice of lime is quite good as well. We'll leave you to go make a gin and tonic, and we'll come back and talk more shortly.
The dry gin is my favourite because it's the first gin that I developed at the distillery, and it also uses honey from my father's beehives. So if I look out the window and I look across to the far end of the field, that's where my father keeps his beehives. And we have around maybe 6 to 12 beehives, depending on the time of year. And we use the honey in the gin because it just adds that really nice touch of sweetness and a nice silky mouthfeel. And it helps to bolster some of the more floral botanicals in there. I've already mentioned the lavender. So that's one of our floral botanicals. And the lavender is also local, so it's grown about 15 minutes away from us, and it brings that lovely, beautiful fragrance to the gin. That's where you get that gorgeous aroma. We vacuum distill this gin. In fact, we distill all of our gins by vacuum, and that just means that we do a cold distillation process. It's quite different to traditional gin distillation, which is normally done hot. We do it cold because in the absence of heat, it just preserves a lot of those really delicate flavours in the gin. So it means we can distill things like the lavender and fresh herbs, which are in the herb gin. That's using fresh basil. So it just means that the flavours that we put into the still are the same as the flavours that we get out. So we get really bright, fresh, clean, delicious botanical flavours in our gins.
And I'm sure you would agree at home, as a gin and tonic, absolutely delicious. It's really, really cracking, sort of go-to Friday night G&T. It's also really good in cocktails. So on your serving guide in your box, you'll see, I think the one we've printed on there is the spiced apple martini. Really simple. You've got the dry gin, some cloudy apple juice, a bit of vanilla and cinnamon. It's absolutely delicious, and you can actually have that hot or cold. So if you warm it up like you would mulled wine, sort of in winter, it's, yeah, a really great winter warmer.
Or shake it with ice in the summer and just have it as a nice chilled cocktail.
Yeah, it's super. Next up, we're going to look at the herb gin. So if you want to pause it now and finish your drink, and we'll come back and have another taste. Next up, we have our herb gin, and Abbie, who's actually our head distiller, is going to tell us a bit about this one. So go ahead at home and pour yourself out a measure.
Thank you. So the herb gin we describe as fresh and herbaceous. It's got lots of basil, lemongrass, a little bit of warming clove in there, and a touch of fennel. So go ahead and have a nose of it. Straight away, you'll get a face full of basil. It's not shy on the basil, and this was intentional because this makes a really, really good long drink with lots of tonic.
It's very different to the dry.
So now take a little sip, same as before. We're going to sip it neat, have a tiny sip. We're going to disregard the first one, go back in for a second, and you'll get loads more flavour. Okay, I get quite a lot of aniseed coming through there. That's a little bit from the fennel, a little bit of licorice also coming from the dried basil. So we use dried basil and fresh basil. And again, the vacuum distillation just brings all of that fresh flavour through into the spirit. We're going to have it with a light tonic this time because it pairs really nicely. So again, start with 2 to 1 and then just dilute as much as you prefer.
There's an interesting point just to talk about on the tonic. So you might have noticed we're using Fever-Tree. We did a blind taste test a couple of years ago, and we tried 26 different tonics blind, and Fever-Tree actually came out top. They're all naturally flavoured and they've got only natural sugars, there's nothing artificial in there, which for us is a big plus.
And we like the plain tonics because sometimes the flavoured tonics can confuse the flavours in the gin slightly, and if they're a bit mismatched, then it can be a bit confusing on the palate. So we quite like just the plain tonic, but you know, if you like flavoured tonics, feel free to explore and play.
There's no right or wrong way.
Yeah, so if you want to pause here, go make yourself a G&T. Garnish for this one, it's really nice with a fresh basil leaf if you have one.
The herb gin is actually Laura who works here. She's our head of drinks development. This is her favourite by quite a long way, and that's purely because of its versatility. So in terms of making cocktails, you can do so much with this. And again, if you look on your serving guide, there's a suggestion on there, and also on the website under the serves page, you can look at a whole plethora of cocktails and you can go and make and explore at home. Our favourite one with this is actually the bee's knees. So it's the herb gin, fresh grapefruit juice and some honey. Really refreshing, really, really delicious.
It's really nice.
One thing to mention, which I haven't done yet actually, is about our tree planting and a bit of our sustainability drive. So for every bottle of dry and herb gin that we sell, we actually plant 1 square metre of native English woodlands, and that's actually up in the Yorkshire Dales. And we work with a brilliant charity called the Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust. And in our first couple of years, we planted over 10,000 square metres of new woodlands, which for a small distillery is quite a feat.
Super proud of that.
Now, when I go up and plant, we do a plant ourselves, and when I go up, it's always howling winds, pouring rain. It's absolutely miserable. And every time Abbie and Laura,
when I do it, it's nice bright sunshine. Great day.
Out.
Love it.
Just luck of the draw, I guess.
We also have just been trialling growing some of our own Yorkshire lemongrass, which is in some of our spirits, and we grow our own basil as well on site too, as part of our sustainable ethos, trying to keep things close to home.
And a lot of that is about reducing our environmental impact, reducing the carbon emissions, and as Ab said, bringing things closer to home. It's just kind of a more wholesome way to produce things, and really interesting for you guys at home to be able to drink something knowing that not only does drinking that bottle help plant trees, but some of those ingredients were grown, you know, within a mile of the distillery, which is fantastic. We're going to leave the herb now, so welcome to pause, enjoy your gin and tonic, and we'll come back and try the Berry+Basil liqueur.
Lastly, we have got the Berry and Basil gin liqueur.
This is one of my favourites. It's a crowd pleaser.
So give yourself a generous pour for this one, because this doesn't really need any dilution. It's great neat. Now this one is made entirely from the dry gin as the base, which has got obviously loads of nice floral, lavender, lemongrass notes in to begin with. And then we steep it with lots of local raspberries, fresh basil, and then we sweeten it just ever so slightly with a little bit of sugar. So that's what makes this a gin liqueur. So have a nose. You're just going to get a nose full of raspberries. It's gorgeous. And then go straight in for a sip. Don't be shy on this one because it's at 25% ABV, so it's a really nice sipping strength. Now I've only sweetened this ever so slightly so that you've just got a little bit of sugar to take the edge off the raspberries, but you still get a nice bit of tartness coming through. The basil adds a little bit of warmth. So you get a nice warming finish. Now this is great in summer or winter. It's nice at Christmas. It's beautiful, straight from the freezer. Chris likes it over ice cream. And serves for this one, it's pretty flexible. So you can either just sip it neat, like I said, over some ice. I don't have a particularly sweet tooth, so I quite like this with a little bit of tonic. If you have a sweet tooth, then use a lemonade as a mixer just to add a little bit more sweetness. Garnish for this, Chris, would you say raspberry, slice of lime?
Yeah, exactly that. Absolutely delicious. Works really, really well. We're going to put a bit of lemonade with this today. So if you want to do the same, your lemonade or tonic at home or have it neat, and we'll see you back in a second. All the colour in this liqueur comes from the raspberries, so there's nothing else added to it, and all those raspberries are grown locally at a fantastic farm. and it's quite unusual to see Abbie smiling when drinking this drink. I absolutely love it, but it's an absolute nightmare to make.
Yeah, I love this drink, but it's really difficult to make, mainly because the seasonal variation with the raspberries. You know, some summers they're more sweet than others, and the colour varies, but we don't try and adjust the colour in any way. We've got no colourings, additives or preservatives in this liqueur. So, you know, it's quite nice to just embrace the seasonal variation. The colour does change and we don't try to correct it, because I think it's, you know, it's as nature intended it. So it's nice to see how it changes.
At this time of our tastings at the distillery, someone will nearly always ask, where does the Cooper King name come from? And it's a really good question. So Charles Cooper King was my great-great-granddad, and he, back in the 1800s, actually traced that family name back to Yorkshire to the year 1030. And we've got these two fantastic family volumes that sort of show that name being traced back. If anyone wants to find out a bit more about that, you feel free to go to the website. We've got some fantastic blogs and information on there about the history. But very quickly, if you notice the logo, the Cooper King logo, it's also on your gin bottles in your box there. That's actually a stylized version of the Cooper King coat of arms. Again, some fantastic heritage, so feel free to go and explore. Now that wraps up the spirits, and if you want to go and enjoy your full drink, and we'll be back to say goodbye shortly. We really hope you've enjoyed your experience today. I know we have.
If you'd like to know any more about the story, the cocktails, our sustainability, or how we make the spirits, just head to cooperkingdistillery.co.uk.
And also remember to use the special code on your serving guide, which will give you free delivery off your first bottle order as well.
So, last thing.
Join us, raise a glass, and toast craftsmanship, honesty, and adventure.
Cheers.
Cheers.